The morning Lily whispered those words to me, I was standing at my kitchen counter, rolling out dough for her birthday cake. My hands were covered in flour. The radio was playing something soft and old, one of those songs my late husband Gerald used to hum while he read the newspaper. The kitchen smelled like butter and vanilla, and for just a moment, everything felt ordinary, safe. The way mornings used to feel before Gerald passed, and I found myself suddenly, terrifyingly alone in a house full of memories. Then my granddaughter tugged on my apron. "Nana," she said. Her voice was barely above a breath. "I have to tell you something, but you can't tell Mom I told you." I set down the rolling pin. Lily was 8 years old. She had Gerald's eyes, that particular shade of gray-green that I had loved for 43 years, and she had her mother's sharp little mind, which was both a gift and, as I was about to learn, the thing that saved me. I crouched down so we were at eye level. "You can tell me anything, sweetheart." She looked over her shoulder at the back door, even though we were alone. Then she leaned in close, and what she said next made the flour on my hands feel like ice. "Mom and Dad were talking last night, after they thought I was asleep." She paused, choosing her words with a carefulness that no 8-year-old should have to use. "They said they're going to make you sign papers so that Dad can be in charge of your money and your house." Another pause. "They said you're getting forgetful and you can't take care of yourself anymore." I stayed very still. "They said they're going to bring a man to your house, a lawyer man, this weekend." I looked at my granddaughter, the small, serious child who had climbed out of bed in the middle of the night to memorize words she didn't fully understand because somewhere in her 8-year-old heart she knew they mattered, and I felt two things at once. The first was a grief so deep it had no bottom, because the people she was describing were her parents, my daughter Diana and her husband Robert, my own flesh and blood. The second thing I felt was absolutely, perfectly calm. "Thank you for telling me, Lilybug," I said. I smoothed her hair back from her forehead. "You did the right thing. Now go finish your cereal, okay? Nana needs to make a phone call." She nodded, very solemn, and padded back to the kitchen table. I picked up my phone and walked to the back porch, closing the screen door softly behind me. Let me tell you something about getting older that nobody warns you about. It's not the aching knees, though those are real. It's not the way the names of old friends sometimes float just out of reach, though that happens too. What nobody tells you is that the people closest to you start to look at you differently. Slowly at first, a slightly louder voice when they talk to you, an extra pause before they hand you something fragile, and then all at once, you realize they've rewritten the story of who you are. In their version, you're no longer a person. You're a problem to be managed. I had been watching it happen with Diana for 2 years. It started small. She began calling me every Sunday to ask if I'd taken my medication, even though I'd never once forgotten. She started forwarding me articles about senior living communities with little notes that said things like, "Just something to think about, Mom." At Christmas dinner last year, she interrupted me mid-sentence to tell Robert what I'd meant to say, as though my words needed translation. And Robert. I want to be fair about Robert, because fairness matters even when it's hard. He wasn't a cruel man. He wasn't the kind of person who kicked dogs or cheated at cards. But he had a particular type of hunger that I recognized, the quiet, patient kind, the kind that waits. Diana had married him 11 years ago, and for the first few years, I genuinely liked him. He was funny. He remembered birthdays. He helped Gerald with yard work without being asked, back when Gerald was still alive and the yard needed tending. But after Gerald died and the house was suddenly, legally, entirely mine, 3 bedrooms, a paid-off mortgage, 40 years of my husband's careful saving sitting in accounts with only my name on them. Something in the way Robert looked at me changed. I noticed. I just didn't want to believe it. My son Patrick, who lives in Portland, had said something to me on the phone about 8 months ago. We were talking about Diana's latest suggestion that I downsize, and he went quiet for a moment and then said, very carefully, "Mom, I don't want to cause trouble, but I think you should talk to someone, a professional, just to make sure everything is set up the way you want it." I'd changed the subject. I wasn't ready. I thought about that conversation now, standing on my back porch with the September sun just starting to warm the garden, where my tomatoes were still stubbornly going, long past the season when most people gave up on them. I was not forgetful. I was not incapable. I was 71 years old, and I had raised 2 children and outlasted 1 heartbreak and built a small catering business from nothing after Gerald retired, and we decided we wanted more from our 60s than a rocking chair. I had kept meticulous books. I had negotiated contracts. I had, in the last 3 years since Gerald passed, handled every single thing: the estate, the taxes, the insurance, the leaking water heater in February, entirely on my own. But none of that would matter once someone put a piece of paper in front of a judge and said the word incapacitated. I scrolled to a name in my phone: Carol Hendricks, estate attorney. Gerald and I had updated our wills with her 5 years ago, and she had sent me a handwritten note when he died. I had thought, more than once, about calling her. I had put it off because calling felt like admitting something I wasn't ready to admit: that this situation with Diana was real and serious, and not the kind of thing that would fix itself over a holiday dinner. It was real. It was serious. I called. She picked up on the 3rd ring. "Margaret," she said, and her voice was warm and careful, the way the voices of people who have seen a lot of human sadness often are. "I'm glad you called. I've had a feeling we'd be speaking soon." I told her everything. Lily's words, the weekend timeline, the lawyer man Diana was planning to bring to my house. I told her about the 2 years of slow creeping erasure. By the time I finished, my coffee had gone cold, and the tomatoes were burning bright red in the morning light, and I was absolutely certain of what I needed to do. "Can you see me today?" I asked. "I'll move some things around," Carol said. "Come at 2. I went inside and finished Lily's birthday cake. I want you to understand that. I iced it carefully, white buttercream with the little pink roses she liked, because it was her birthday, and none of this was her fault, and she deserved a beautiful cake, regardless of what her parents were planning. She helped me put the candles in, very precisely, 1 for each year, plus 1 to grow on, and she didn't ask me anything else about the phone call. But when I hugged her goodbye after lunch, when Diana came to pick her up, Diana, who smiled at me with that particular stretched smile she'd been wearing for 2 years, the one that didn't reach her eyes, Lily held on a few seconds longer than usual. "I love you, Nana," she said into my shoulder. "I love you too, Lilybug," I said, "more than all the tomatoes in the garden." She giggled, which was the right response. Then she got in the car, and Diana drove away, and I watched until the car turned the corner. Then I got in my own car and drove to Carol's office. Here's what I learned that afternoon, sitting across from Carol Hendricks, with her wall of diplomas behind her and a yellow legal pad between us. I had been far more vulnerable than I knew. Without any legal protection in place, a petition for guardianship, which was almost certainly what Diana and Robert were moving toward, could be filed on the basis of very little. A few concerned statements from family members, a doctor's note, even a vague one. The word forgetful said enough times to enough people. Once guardianship was granted, the guardian controlled everything: where I lived, how I spent my money, whether I could travel, sell property, make gifts to my grandchildren. It was, Carol said, one of the most powerful legal instruments that existed, and one of the most frequently abused. "What can we do?" I asked. "Before this weekend?" Carol set down her pen. "Quite a lot, actually. The best protection is to make it unmistakably clear in legally documented form that you are competent, that your wishes are your own, and that you have already made deliberate decisions about your affairs." We worked for 2 hours. First, we updated my power of attorney. But instead of leaving it blank and therefore vulnerable, we made it a springing power of attorney, meaning it would only take effect if two independent physicians simultaneously determined I was truly incapacitated. Not Diana's word, not Robert's concern. Two doctors, independently. Then we updated my will. I want to be honest here, that part was hard, not because I didn't know what I wanted, but because writing it down meant looking clearly at what my family had become. Diana and Robert were removed from any direct inheritance. It wasn't punishment exactly. It was clarity. Whatever I left behind, I wanted it to go somewhere it would be protected and loved. I established a trust. The beneficiaries were Patrick, Lily, held in trust until she turned 25, and a small fund for the local library where Gerald and I had volunteered every fall for 15 years. The trustee was Carol herself, which she said she would accept given the circumstances. Then Carol had me write a letter, in my own hand, dated that day. It stated, clearly and in complete sentences, exactly what I had decided and why, and that I had made these decisions of my own free will in full possession of my faculties. Thank you very much. She had 2 members of her staff witness it. When it was done, I sat back in the leather chair and realized my hands had stopped shaking. I hadn't even noticed they were shaking until they stopped. Is there anything else? I asked. Carol considered. The house, she said. Do you want to put it in the trust as well? I thought about the tomatoes. The kitchen with the flour on the counter? The back porch where Gerald used to sit on summer evenings and watch the light change? The bedroom where I had slept for 40 years? Yes, I said. Put the house in the trust. I drove home through the long gold light of late afternoon and made myself dinner and sat on the back porch for a while in the quiet. I didn't call Patrick yet. I would, soon, but not that night. That night, I just wanted to sit with the particular feeling of having done something important for myself, something I'd been afraid of for too long. Diana called on Friday evening to confirm Sunday's visit. She said she and Robert wanted to have a family conversation about some things. Her voice was the voice she used when she was managing a situation, smooth, a little rehearsed. Of course, I said. Come at 2. I'll have coffee ready. Mom, she said, and I could hear her trying to read me the way she always did. Are you okay? I'm wonderful, I said, and I meant it. They arrived Sunday exactly at 2. Diana had dressed up slightly, which told me she'd planned this as a formal occasion. Robert was carrying a leather folder. Inside that folder, I was nearly certain, were documents he was hoping I would sign. I had made coffee. I had also made cookies, which felt like the right touch. You can be composed and also offer people cookies. The 2 things are not mutually exclusive. We sat in the living room. Diana took the armchair she always took. Robert sat close to her on the love seat, the leather folder balanced on his knee. There was a man with them. I'd expected this from what Lily had told me, but it was still something to see. A man I'd never met sitting in my living room on a Sunday afternoon holding his own set of folders. He introduced himself as a colleague of Robert's, someone with experience in elder care planning. He had a particular kind of careful professional warmth that I recognized as practiced. Margaret, Robert began, we've been thinking a lot about your situation. We care about you, and we want to make sure you're protected. Diana reached over and put her hand on my arm. We love you, Mom. We just want to make sure you have support. I looked at my daughter. I looked at the hand on my arm. I thought about all the Sundays she'd call to ask about my medication, all the articles about senior living, the stretched smile that didn't reach her eyes. I thought about her daughter, my Lily, my serious gray-green-eyed Lily, standing in my kitchen in the early morning, choosing her words so carefully. And I felt something that surprised me. Not anger, not grief, though the grief was there underneath, always. What I felt was a deep, settled, unshakable certainty. I took a slow sip of my coffee. I'm so glad you came, I said, because there are some things I'd like to share with you as well. I reached beside my chair and picked up the manila envelope Carol had given me. I set it on the coffee table. Robert's eyes went to it immediately. Last Thursday, I said. I met with my estate attorney. I've made some updates to my arrangements, which I think are important for everyone to know about. The room went very quiet. My power of attorney has been restructured. It will only activate if two independent physicians determine I'm incapacitated, simultaneously and independently. I paused to let that land. My will has been updated. My house has been placed in a trust. Another pause. Everything is documented, witnessed, and filed. Diana's hand had gone very still on my arm. I said, had a full cognitive evaluation done on Friday. Carol arranged it. This was true. It had taken 2 hours, and I had scored well. I had the paperwork. If anyone has concerns about my mental clarity, I'm happy to share the results. The man with the practice warmth had stopped looking warm. Robert cleared his throat. Mom, we weren't suggesting. Robert, I said, gently but very clearly. I've been your mother-in-law for 11 years, and I'm going to ask you to let me finish. He closed his mouth. I want to be clear about something, I said. I am not forgetful. I am not confused. I am not lonely enough or frightened enough to sign anything placed in front of me without reading it first. I built a business. I raised 2 children. I managed an estate. I looked at Diana. I love you. I will always love you, but I will not be managed. Diana's eyes were bright in a way that could have been tears or could have been something else. I wasn't sure. The arrangement I've made, I continued, protects everyone appropriately, including Lily. I said her name carefully, watching Diana's face. Something flickered there. She'll be provided for, in a way that serves her directly. The colleague with the folders excused himself a few minutes later. He had somewhere to be, he said. He was sure we understood. He was sorry to have to rush off. He didn't come back. The 3 of us sat together for a while longer. Diana drank her coffee and didn't say much. Robert drank his coffee and said even less. I offered them cookies and they both took one, which struck me as both very human and a little funny under the circumstances. Before she left, Diana stood in the hallway and looked at me for a long moment. The stretched smile was gone. What was there instead was more complicated, something I couldn't fully name. Shame, maybe. The beginning of it. Mom, she said. Diana, I said. She hugged me. Briefly, a little stiffly, but she hugged me. I'll call you this week, she said. I'll be here, I said. I stood in the doorway and watched them pull out of the driveway. Then I closed the door and stood in my quiet house, my house and a trust with my name on it, and I breathed. I called Patrick that evening. He cried a little, which he would deny if you asked him, because he has always been that particular kind of man who cries quietly and then says he had something in his eye. He said he was proud of me. He said he was proud of me. He said he was sorry he hadn't pushed harder 8 months ago when he'd first raised it. You couldn't have pushed me, I told him. I had to get there myself. I called Lily on her birthday, 2 days later. We talked for 20 minutes about her new bicycle and the book she was reading and whether or not cats understood what you said to them. I told her I thought they understood everything and simply chose which parts to acknowledge, which made her laugh. Before we hung up, she said, Nana, is everything okay? With the papers and stuff? I smiled at the phone. 8 years old. Gerald's eyes. A mind like a compass. Everything is exactly as it should be, I said. Because of you. She was quiet for a moment. Then I just didn't want anyone to take your house. No one is going to take my house, I said. I promise. And I meant it, because I had made sure it was true. I went back to the kitchen after we hung up. I turned on the radio, that same soft station, the one that plays the songs Gerald used to hum, and I started a new batch of dough, and the kitchen filled up with the smell of butter and vanilla, and outside in the garden, the last of the tomatoes were catching the afternoon light, still stubbornly, beautifully going. There's something people don't understand about women like me. Women who've been quiet for a long time. They mistake the quiet for weakness. They think the patience is passivity, They see a woman standing at a kitchen counter with flour on her hands and they think, here is someone we can move around like furniture. They forget that the woman has been watching, that she has been listening, that she has, for longer than they realize, been making a different kind of plan. They come with their folders and their careful voices and their practiced warmth, and they find that everything they thought was undefended has already been secured. Not by shouting, not by fighting, just by knowing what matters and getting there first. I am 71 years old. I am not forgetful. I am not confused. I am a woman who knows exactly what she has and exactly what she intends to keep. And I have a granddaughter with gray-green eyes who will, someday, understand everything she did for me on a quiet September morning when she stood in my kitchen and chose to tell the truth. I'm keeping the tomatoes going for her. I think she'd like that. I've thought a lot about what made the difference. Not the legal documents, though those mattered enormously. Not even Carol's steady voice on the phone, though I'm grateful for it still. What made the difference was a choice. A small, quiet, irreversible choice to finally take myself seriously. For 2 years, I watched the slow erosion happen and told myself I was imagining it. That's what we do sometimes, when the threat comes from someone we love. We explain it away. We find softer names for it. We say, she's just worried about me, when what we mean is, I can see what's happening and I'm afraid of what it means. Fear is not weakness, but letting fear make your decisions for you, that is a kind of surrender. And I had been surrendering, inch by inch, without ever meaning to. What Lily gave me that morning was not just information. She gave me the one thing I had been quietly refusing to give myself: permission to act. An 8-year-old child standing in my kitchen with flour on the counter and birthday candles on the table looked at a situation that frightened her and chose honesty over comfort. She didn't know the legal terms. She didn't understand power of attorney or guardianship or estate trusts. She only knew that something was wrong and that her grandmother deserved to know. That kind of courage has a way of being contagious. There's a simple truth underneath everything that happened. The people who tried to take what was mine were counting on my silence. They had built their entire plan around the assumption that I would be too confused, too trusting, or too heartbroken to act. And they weren't entirely wrong to assume it, because for a long time I had been all three of those things. What they miscalculated was the moment I stopped being them. The consequences that followed were not punishment in any dramatic sense. Diana and Robert simply encountered the natural result of a plan built on a false premise. When you design something to exploit a weakness that no longer exists, the design fails. That's not fate, and it's not luck. It's just the ordinary logic of cause and effect, playing out the way it always does when someone finally decides to close the door. I think often about what I want Lily to understand when she's older and can understand it fully. I want her to know that intelligence without honesty is just cleverness, and cleverness without integrity eventually turns against itself. I want her to know that real strength is rarely loud. It doesn't announce itself, it doesn't need an audience, it simply does what needs to be done and then goes back to making birthday cake. I want her to know that the most important decisions she will ever make are the ones she makes for herself, about herself, before anyone else gets to make them for her. And I want her to know that she already understood all of this at 8 years old, standing in a kitchen that smelled like vanilla, choosing truth. I'm still in my house, the tomatoes are still going, and every time Lily visits, I let her put the candles on the cake, precisely, carefully, one for each year plus one to grow on. She earned that.